Let me introduce the panel for the session content, the reason they watch, and we'll come back again. We'll start from here with Stuart, and why don't you guys just tell us your name and why you love OTT, and, and then we'll get into the questions.
Hello, my name is Stuart Shapiro. I'm the founder and creator of Night Flight, which is currently an SVOD channel, Night Flight Plus. Night Flight was a TV show that started in 1981, which I created and produced. It was the all-night-long show on USA Network for the entire decade of the 80s. And I maintained that library for 30 years. And then finally, when OTT and technology allowed us to actually become a channel, a niche channel, I launched it 3 years ago. It's on Roku, Amazon, and Apple TV, and at nightflightplus.com. And soon, it'll be Night Flight TV, our first AVOD channel on Xumo.
Hi, I'm Rob Yaron. I'm VP of Content and Strategic Research at Cox Media Group. And just to set the stage, Cox Media Group is one of three major divisions of Cox Enterprises, the other two being Cox Cable and Cox Automotive, Jones Kelly Blue Book, and Auto Trader. So I represent a true local broadcaster doing OTT. We own 14 television stations in 10 markets. We were one of the first local broadcasters to program 24/7 OTT streams in addition to VOD. And when I say program, it wasn't just news and news replays. It's a mix of news, original local programming, and acquired third-party programming. And I'll tell you, nothing is easy. In fact, Stephen and I are trying to get Newsy on our channels, and it's not so easy just to say, hey, can we get Newsy? There's feeds involved and all kinds of things. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that as well.
Stephen Strong, I lead strategic partnerships for the national news brand Newsy. We were one of the first news apps to launch in the OTT space. It's been great for us. About 80% of our audience is on OTT right now. People spend about 40 minutes plus with our content, and we make a lot of money in the OTT space, which is great too.
Andrea Clark Hall, I lead business development for Tubi.
You had the best introduction. Hi, I'm Stefan Vanning, and I lead content strategy and programming for Xumo. Xumo is an OTT platform, a little bit different than Tubi in that we started and focused on the linear streaming channels. We do have VOD available as well. And we also started on the distribution side with smart TVs. So we are built natively into different OEM partners. So if you think of going to Best Buy, buying an LG television, connecting it to the internet, scanning for channels, it brings in all of the Xumo channels into the EPG as linear streaming. So Night Flight could be a channel, Newsy is a channel, and others, and they're discoverable by up and down on the remote, sort of the oldest way to navigate. And then we also have Xumo as an aggregated OTT app on Fire and Roku and iOS and Android and all of that.
Oh, great, thank you. Well, let's start with looking at the landscape of TV. And in the cable era, the average person has access to about 200 to 300 different channels, but the Nielsen data says they watch typically only about 14 to 16 of them every month. Most of you guys have probably 60 to 90 apps on your smartphone, but you probably only use 30 of them in a month and maybe only 9 of them in any given day. Now, in the OTT world, how do you guys see this breaking out? If you had to look at what the home screen would look like, what these guys' home screen would look like in the next few years, how many apps are going to be there? What kind of apps? How is that going to break out?
I'll jump in. I mean, that was the exact sort of business problem that we set out to solve with Xumo, right? Was how are you going to compete in a landscape of apps, especially in the smart TV space? How are you going to create each, 5,000 apps that sit in the smart TV in a app store that nobody knows how to get to with a clunky remote? And so that's why, sort of from a Xumo standpoint, we need to differentiate the platform by building it natively into these OEMs so that there was no app interface, so that when these guys hook up their TV and connect it to the internet, they already have a TV populated with channels that are free ad-supported channels. I do think that data that you just handed out continues today, because even on Zumo, what we do see is sort of 4 channels up, 4 channels down, probably an average of around 14 channels that are used in any given session by our users.
Is that the same thing you guys see at Tubi too?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit unique in our instance because each person's user interface at Tubi is personalized for them, right? But we do see that, people are only going so far within a given row, or only scrolling down so far. And just like, Stephen said, this was the premise that Tubi set out to solve in creating our business, was to be an aggregator and to be a one-stop shop, so that when you do look at your phone in the future, there are only a very small handful of apps that have everything you could possibly want to watch.
Do you guys think that the trend seems to be moving towards more on-demand viewing, but other than news and sports, do you think everything's going to be watched on demand, or do you think there's any room for linear feeds?
So our research, so if you like what I'm saying, you can congratulate me. If you don't, go to Andrew Hare, because we work very closely with Maggot, and we're very well researched through a Maggot. And what we see is that, my analogy is, it's kind of like people who travel, and some people like a tour, and they say, put a drink in my hand and pick me up and then drop me off when the vacation's over, or some people like to plan it themselves. We see more people through our research who like it planned for them. And we see the bulk of our impressions. We have dynamic ad insertion. We see the large majority of our impressions coming through our linear stream compared to VOD. But because they want both, our templates, we start autoplay with our streams, then it pulls full after about 10 seconds, so that people know the VOD is there, but we want to push the linear streams. And so far, that's been working.
Yeah, I think that's I always go back to the analogy of FM radio, because in the old days, you would turn on a FM radio station, a particular DJ would turn you on. So the whole concept of discovery of programming was always there. You loved a song, you would buy the album. So I think typically you have that same metaphor where you have VOD, but you have to actually have a DJ. You have to have a curation where you feed your audience. Because all of us, how many times you go to Netflix, you look, you spend 10 minutes, you go, and you don't find anything. So there has to always be this sense of feeding, and then with feeding then becomes the branching. And the branching can go to VOD, but can also go, or I think, into an interactive future as well, where you may be able to actually branch off to not necessarily a VOD, but maybe a binary type of content where it be an audio content. But I still think you need the combination of both.
Yeah, we really believe in the linear, and it's that lean back experience. It's that idea that you don't want to have to DJ your own way through every piece of content. I think there's things that Tubi does that's excellent in terms of personalization to make it easier for you. For us, it's really around the stitch linear. For example, Bill was up here earlier today, Bill Sager, for the preview channel, and was talking about sort of this idea of a 24/7 channel full of behind the scenes and game trailers and new release trailers and horror trailers. And even on that channel, we see people sticking around just to sort of lean back and look at all the different movie trailers, as opposed to, I wonder what that movie's about, and kind of selecting their way through. But I would ask these guys, how are you guys consuming content? I'm sure it's a mix of both, but are there days when you're just like, man, I wonder what's on, and channel surfing across stuff? Or is it always sort of Netflix and pick?
Most of the time it's pretty targeted for me. Like I'll want to watch a very specific thing and just turn that on. But there's definitely those other times. I use a Roku box on my TV, and I can definitely spend a long time just scrolling through all of the choices, like looking for something, yeah.
For me, I find that when I'm with my friends, we can never find something to watch. Like, the more people in the room, the harder it is to find something to watch. And then at that point, we're all passed out on the couch, especially on a Sunday. But I find also that I think the the streaming services aren't really smart enough. I think they need to feed me things based on the time of day. I think that if it's a Tuesday night, a work night, and I go to bed at 11 p.m., it should know not to serve me anything that's past, let's say, like 30 minutes if it's 10:30 at night. Like something that's smart enough to know also the length of the program that I should be fed, as opposed to just straight up serving genres they know I like and enjoy.
When my family like wants to watch a movie, like we can never decide what we like want. So sometimes we never like watch together. But whenever like I'm by myself, I either just like scroll on all like the channels or like on the TV, or just go to Netflix and watch.
And when something ends, do you go directly and search for another show? Or to Stefan's question initially, do you like let the auto play and just like a playlist? Do you like it to be like the radio where it just plays, or do you prefer to actually actively pick show after show after show?
I would say one feature that I really enjoy, I think Netflix put it out, was being able to see previews of shows. So like the first line will be the new releases and short trailers of them. So that's sometimes helpful just to get a little bit of a snippet of what it's going to be about or what it's generally about. But a lot of time I find myself going from app to app to app, and then that's just taking more time out of my day, and it's just frustrating. So that's where that churn comes in. And so I'd rather just it be smart enough, again, like I said before, smart enough to know what I want in that moment.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's a series, then if it's gonna autoplay the next episode, I'm usually a sucker for that, and I'll start watching the next one. If it's a movie, like I usually wouldn't watch a random other movie that would start to autoplay, and I could actually switch platforms and see what's on the other stuff.
I would like outside. I was watching Netflix on my phone, and it like just like auto like it counts down from like 5, and then it's the next episode every time. So I like that, and like sometimes I don't like when like there's long ads between like each like show.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's interesting. You raised an interesting point. You said you were outside watching Netflix on your phone. There's a new service that's coming out called Quibi, which is short for Quick Bites, which is a premium video service. I'll start with the panel and see what you guys think about it. That its whole premise is that it's premium content that you can watch in quick little bites, like when you go outside. What do you guys think about the prospects for Quibi and that kind of behavior? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is monetizing short form content. You need massive scale. You need YouTube like crazy scale in order to monetize it. And so, I mean, I think the idea is great, but I think the monetization piece will be a challenge to get that scale.
Can I ask a question to that? So my question is, aren't there enough content creators out today to serve up enough content, short form content, for a service like that?
Well, they've raised $1 billion initially, and then just recently another $1 billion. So their plan is to actually spend $2 billion making like Game of Thrones type shows, but chopping them up into little 10-minute bites. So each episode is only going to be maybe 5 to 10 minutes long, so that when you go outside, you have just a few minutes. You can, instead of watching just a YouTube video, you could watch actually a super premium kind of show. So that's the prospect. And they would charge you, say, $5 a month to watch for that service. Would you pay?
So it's basically like Netflix.
Yeah. That's what I was getting at. It was like, how is that different than Netflix, watching Netflix for 5 minutes, right? Yeah, okay. Well, that's that.
Kind of do that already, don't you? I mean, you go through, you watch 5 minutes, you move on.
Well, that's one of the big challenges I think they're going to face. Another question is, in this new world, brands have always been a big deal because people watched, network brands. Do you think brands are still going to matter, or is it just people are just going to watch shows, or is it going to be a hybrid?
For us, brands still matter. I mean, one of the ways we started out and have continued is and differentiates us from some of the other AVOD platforms is that we're very specific about brand channels. So Newsy is Newsy. It's not taking Newsy clips and putting it in a Zumo News channel. And therefore, you start to build that brand loyalty and brand affinity with your users. They know what this channel stands for, what that channel stands for. And we see channel brands still matter. So, for example, we have some cable channels that have taken content that's in front of the paywall and not necessarily part of their cable package that have channels on Zumo. So Fox Sports, for example, is a channel on Zumo where you're getting the highlights, you're getting short form digital originals, and you're getting segments out of the studio shows from FS1 and FS2 and all of their different cable things. But people know what Fox Sports stands for. They know what rights they have, and they know what highlights and topics of conversations are going to be covered there, and that therefore it drives a user base. So I do think brands matter. I think that there is a little bit of, there's a content panel, there is a little differentiation, even in talking with these guys about how they use services. Everything was about entertainment. Everything was a movie or a show. And I do think that you still have sort of channel affinity for news, information, infotainment, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, that's why for us, brands definitely matter, but that creates a whole set of challenges for us. So we tried coming up with new names, and consumers would say, what are you doing? We know you as Channel 2 or whatever it is. But at the same time, then it reminded them of exactly linear broadcast, and we're trying to do something new on OTT. So it's a challenge to kind of slice that difference. And so we've renamed our linear streams. We found immediacy was important. So it's either now or 24/7. And we have different logos, but still retain place and the call letters as well. So that's the direction we've taken.
I think for us, I mean, branding is important in two ways. Obviously, if we do a distribution deal, we want people to know it's Newsy content, but there are a number of distribution deals we didn't do recently because we weren't comfortable with other brands on the platform. So it's important, our brand and what brands we associate with.
I think brands are always going to matter, and I think there's different kinds of brands. There are channel brands, like if you say it's a, you used to a Channel 2, or, I mean, I kind of use AMC as an example of a brand that started out as kind of a no brand, but became a brand with Walking Dead and a few of their shows. I was fortunate because Night Flight is almost a 40-year-old brand, and it was dormant for 30 years, but it had millions of people that it was like a rite of passage. So that as long as you have a distinct DNA that is part of your brand, and you honor that and cherish it and nurture and obviously curate that, then you have a brand that carries a devoted audience to it, and that's the most precious of all. So, I mean, I don't see a time where brands will ever. I mean, History Channel, National Geographic. When you say Fox, it is a brand, but it's a brand that they've identified through programming licenses in a way. Not that we all do.
Well, what do you guys think, though, in the long term? It seems that you have services like Netflix or Amazon that are aggregating so much content in terms of different niches and different types of content under one brand. And then you have services like Pluto or Zumo or Tubi that are aggregating many, many brands into one app. What's the future for, say, a service like Night Flight that maybe tries to be a standalone app that's all about one thing? Is there a future for those kinds of apps? Newsy, you guys have a standalone app. Will you be able to survive in a world of these giant aggregators and giant mega mall services?
I think someone at our parent company at one point said half of the new platforms are going to succeed and half of them are going to fail. So we have a very strategic kind of distribution strategy on where we launch our content. And again, more people are not going to have the Newsy app than are. So we're going to license our documentaries to Tubi, and we're going to do a deal with Cox to distribute content. We're going to have a channel with Stefan on Zumo. And really for us, it's around maintaining the brand experience, but around having our content where people are already consuming content. So it's always going to be important for us to have an owned and operated presence, but we're not going to keep everything there because we want people to watch the content. So we're very strategic about that.
I'm completely convinced that the niche channels will have to consolidate and bundle, whereby at some point you're going to pay $5 or $7 or $10, and you'll get 5 or 10 of the really small little brands, assuming you're SVOD and it doesn't all move to AVOD. But I see it's history will repeat itself. When I started Nightflight, it was Madison Square Garden Network. We were in 700,000 homes, and there were 5 channels. And when Sci-Fi Channel came out, I think it was like the 10th channel. Everybody, oh my God, how could we have 10 channels? But then everything consolidates and repeats itself. So I think it's absolutely going to happen in this world again in the next few years.
And I think when you start talking about ad-supported, it's all about scale. So, I've even told some of our content partners, you need to also be on Tubi. You need to also be on, because in order for it to, you should be telling them the same thing about Zumo. That was your cue, and you missed it. Yeah. It's okay. But because scale is the game in ad-supported content, so you have to be everywhere in order to support that ecosystem.
So I'll go out on a limb as a person who has content in their title and say to the previous discussion, if content is still king, given what everybody's saying here, which I agree with, the king has been greatly weakened. And I think you can be a great king, but if you don't have the territory to rule over, it doesn't mean as much. So I think distribution is extremely important. And you talk about scale, which is what all businesses are striving for now. It is tough to be in a world if you don't have scale. And so I think that's an important consideration, and how you get around or figure out the business prospects for surviving without scale or existing without scale, I think is a real challenge today.
So you're saying there's not much future for Sansa in the North?
I know about not much future. It just makes it.
But it's harder. It's okay.
One of the comments that I haven't heard all day long today is editorial. We sort of mentioned social, but I think that editorial content that is part and parcel with all of the content we're talking about is something that actually drives viewership and drives patronage. And the whole concept of editorial today and discovery is really, really important. And I see that all of us that actually create content, the ones that are the leading brands, they have editorial that goes along with it, so that you can read about what is out there. And so you're not just discovering by turning on the app. You know in advance that there's an actor or there's a director or there's a nostalgic part of the content, and that's what you want to go to see.
All right, I wanted to get into content creation itself. One thing that I think has been very interesting over the last maybe 5 or 10 years has been how technology is impacted what the nature of content is, from the low-cost tools that enable things like YouTube videos and influencer videos to, if you think about things like Twitch, where people now just spend time watching people in their underwear playing video games, to a service like TikTok, which has created a whole new content category and making your own music videos. What do you guys think about the nature of storytelling and how it's been impacted by digital tools?
I think right now with social platforms, anyone and everyone can be a storyteller. Before it was having a lot of equipment, being a big broadcaster, and now everyone can, and we use that to our advantage. When we have reporters in the field, they go live with interactive sessions with fans and viewers, and we use that to feed into the funnel. So I think it's been a great thing for the industry.
Yeah, I read an interesting blog post recently that talked about how in the early days of YouTube, we heard everything all about user-generated content, right? UGC. But that now that all of the editing tools and all the tools are getting more sophisticated, it's all starting to look more and more of the same: professionally produced content and user-generated content, and those lines are starting to blend. And they made a distinction. They said it would be enterprise content, large, enterprise content, and small to medium business content. So your doctor who is producing videos about health will look a lot just the same as, almost as the same as a studio produced quality piece of content. It'll just be differentiated by the size of the enterprise producing it.
So as somebody who spent 20 years making content and developing content and being a program development person until I turned to the dark side of platform distribution, I think that it's always kind of gone up and down, right? So when the shaky cameras and handheld cameras came out for reality shows, it was like, this is the end of professionally produced content. And when the phones came out and it was, selfie videos for YouTube, this is the end of professionally produced content. I think people by nature are attracted to stories, tell stories, and when you can connect a story, no matter how you connect, what the medium is to connect, then it can work. And it may not work at mass, it may not work at scale, it may not be Game of Thrones, there's an expectation there, but you can have, YouTube channels of individual influencers that are making videos in their basement once a week that connect to millions and millions of people because their story resonates or their personality resonates with them. And I think that's going to continue. I don't think you're going to see sort of the influencer videos, even the sort of ones with millions of fans competing with the likes of Games of Thrones, because then you tie in marketing and that kind of stuff, and it becomes more of a marketing game than it does a production quality game.
Yeah, you raise a great point in terms of production. What defines production quality? Do you think that that's a generational thing, that younger people may have a different take in terms of what they accept as quality? An analogy would be, if you grew up in the 1950s and 60s, what you thought was a quality pop song was something recorded in a fancy studio with an orchestra and lots of singers and a lot of production value. And today, what you might consider a really good pop song is a rapper with a laptop computer with a repetitive beat with somebody repeating words. So do you think there will be an evolution maybe in what people, what these guys think is a quality television show?
I'd like to hear what they think. Are there shows you watch that you don't think look good, but you still watch them? Or does it have to have a certain level of quality for you to watch a program, whether it be long or short?
I think I'm fine with something, like if it's animated, it doesn't have to be like super high production value if it's like funny and has a good story. But if it's live action, I do want something better quality.
I think that today we all expect high quality. Doesn't matter where we are, what device we're on. I think we just all expect there to be high quality, no buffer or any of that. But I just think it's amazing how high the production quality and value is on Netflix and like as compared to the movie theater today. Like Bird Box, for example, that got so much buzz, and the quality there is just as good as a film at the movie theater. So I think now when you compare quality, it's really hard, it's really tough because there's so much production value and dollars going into the streaming platforms as the big studios and big film.
Another one. Do you watch Brat? Have you seen that channel on YouTube? Yeah.
No.
Or do you watch a lot of YouTube videos though?
Yeah.
Now, are they as good to you as Nickelodeon or Disney Channel?
I think they're funnier.
Well, okay, then they cost a fraction of the price.
But does the TV screen matter? So if you're watching a video and it's on your phone, like you're doing outside, or on a computer, does that matter do you want it to look better on the TV screen, or does it not matter?
It doesn't really matter because I just want to watch the video. So I don't care if it's like on a computer, my phone, or a TV.
Can we have more viewers like you? Because we found there has to be a certain level that people start to get negative, or viewers start to get negative, even on OTT, if there isn't a certain level of production quality because, as you say, everything is so good today.
If you're talking production quality, I mean, our world is driven by talent and genius. And the best example, the Aretha Franklin movie, which I just saw recently, totally out of focus, but completely genius that comes off the screen. So ultimately, we're driven by talent and genius. The quality of video production is just a given today. So it really comes down to, the Steven Spielbergs and the great filmmakers and the great storytellers, and those that are really the geniuses rise above, and that's what we want to watch, that percolates, and that'll never change.
And I think the quality starts in, you heard it here a little bit too, but we've heard it all day, the quality starts becoming in the distribution of it versus the actual production of it, right? If there's buffering, if the Raptors game goes dark, if you're watching square video on a 16:9 screen, that might bother you more. So all of a sudden it's the distribution of it and producing for the platforms that you're distributing to, and then making sure that those distributors can carry the streams in the right way to get it to people.
Now, so far, most of the original content that's been produced for streaming services has been the SVOD services, the big ones, Amazon and Netflix. The AVOD services, you guys, as you were saying in your presentation, most of it is library content and licensed content. Do you think there'll be a point where AVOD will ever scale to the point where you'll see AVOD services themselves investing in original productions?
Good question. So our CEO Farhad's really public out there saying, we will never do original content. We are leaning in heavily into library content, as Netflix and Amazon and the SVOD services have focused so heavily on originals that they've cut back licensing all of the library favorites. They've left this huge gaping opportunity for services like Tubi. That said, never is a long time, right? And so I am not psychic, but as Avon is no different than the broadcast model from original TV. It's kind of funny what old is new again, right? So as the AVOD services continue to scale, never is a long time.
I think it's also going to be interesting outside of the services, what do the platforms do? Someone like Roku has a massive user base now. Do the platforms get into the original content space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just a matter of those economics. As ad dollars shift to the ad-supported platforms and the OTT platforms away from cable, as they try to connect to those different audiences, there's going to be more money in that ecosystem to create more demand to differentiate yourself from different platforms, and then you start working on originals. At Zumo, we're not out there saying we're never going to do originals, we're not doing originals now, but at the same time, what we have done is work with different channel partners to bring sponsors on board that sponsor pieces of content that may be original or exclusive to our platform. We've also done stuff just for the audience, for example, to build audience and engagement and return rates. So for example, with Fail Army, one of our channels, we had a Fail Fridays. It wasn't a half-hour show, it wasn't an hour show, it was just a curated half hour of the best fails of the week that was curated in an original way for Zumo, and so therefore maybe exclusive to Zumo because it wasn't getting distributed elsewhere, but it was more of an original curation project. And what we saw was 44% week over week growth as we marketed and promoted that. People were coming back to that channel every Friday to say, what's new here, what's different. So there is something about original programming that can drive users. It's just you need the economics, the underlying economics to support it when you get into Game of Thrones.
We've got, I think, about 6 minutes left, or 7 minutes of that. We go to the questions to give you guys some chance to participate. So, get the mics.
Hi, William Sager, the Preview Channel. Short form programming. Yes, you can make money with short form programming. It depends on the kind of short form programming you have. In our case, we have original programming, you could call it that. In fact, it's produced 365 days a year, every year, and it's produced by the studios, and it's got the biggest box office stars and directors and names in it. And we were up, I think, for 45 days, and You were nice enough to send me a check, so yes. We actually do generate funds.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? Back in the back, I think is that table 14?
We'll do 16 first because it's
Okay.
closer.
Hey, Jeremy Jones, Weather Group. Is there any further thoughts that
Well, I think one of the things that I think she summed it up is that you know if you look at the use case, you're saying that you have these short times during the day when what are your choice options for content for those quick bites, and one of them is Netflix or Amazon or everything else you have streamed, and is that just as good as buying another service? What's the difference? And to me, it doesn't watching 10 minutes of an episode of 13 Reasons Why and then coming back and watching 10 more minutes and 10 more minutes, how is that different than watching QB to me? So my opinion is if for some reason the programming, I guess, is better, but the nature of breaking it into little bites, you kind of do that already with regular television. You can watch it in little bites, right? Can't you?
From an industry standpoint too, there's companies that have sort of tried it before. You have sort of Go90 and Comcast Watchable, so it's in a different content slate, and as a short-form content provider, excited to have conversations with them, and something they're doing that's interesting is everything on the platform. If you spin your phone, it works either direction, so I think they have the right people, right funds, right creators behind it, so I'm curiously, optimistically watching.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to the strength of the content overall, right? If it connects with people and it becomes water cooler conversation and did you see and there's the marketing budgets behind it, it could succeed. Otherwise, it's just going to be competing with all of the other platforms.
Name, company, question.
Hi, I'm Ted with Culigent. I guess for the panel, interested in what the investment curve looks like now for launching a channel. You know, it's a balance between time to market, how professional you want it to make it, what you spend on it. Not sure how to ask the question, but in the old days, you'd invest a lot, and then you'd give it a certain time, and you wait for the bear and the bull report to come out to cut a show or whatever. What does an investment curve look like today for these kinds of OTT channels, since you need to spin them up, test the market, spin them down, try something different?
It's really not as much. I mean, you have instant feedback, right? So you kind of see what's working. I mean, you still have to have sort of a runway of marketing to be in market and sort of find the audience. But in terms of getting started, if you have a library of content, at least speaking for Zumo, if you have a library of content and sort of this brand channel, for us, we've tried to make it really easy so there's not sort of an app build and all these development costs that go into standing up the distribution. It's a content feed, and our engine can sort of curate the programming, stitch the programming, dynamically switch the programming on the fly to sort of keep it evergreen and refreshed on the wheel. So there's a lot of stuff that the platforms are doing on the back end so that you don't have the overhead of having a scheduler, having you know, all the different departments that you needed in the cable days to kind of do that. So when you take all that overhead down and you can spend it more on content or even marketing for that matter, then the sort of return comes quicker. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think they're just to differentiate a bit. You know, there's one thing if you're talking about starting a channel on an existing OTT service, if you want to plug a simple feed into Zumo. But if you actually want to launch your own standalone service, people tremendously underestimate what goes into building a streaming service and an app. It takes massive engineering resources, teams of engineers, teams of just really smart people that are very expensive to hire.
Yeah. Which goes back to the original question about the myriad of apps and why what my answer was pointed at where I think sort of the content side is going, which is distributed properties versus sort of owned and operated apps across everything.
I think you mean from our experience, launching an app, the content, the editorials, all economical. I think the challenge for us as more content creators move into the OTT space is the marketing. as more people are marketing in the OTT space, marketing costs are increasing. I talk to a lot of small content providers who have the mentality build and they will come. I think there are 5,000 apps on Roku, and people launch apps and just assume you're going to get discovered and you don't need to do much, and that unfortunately is not the case.
Yeah, you're spot on. Discovery on device is becoming the number one most important thing and the number one challenge, and is a large part of my job.
I would definitely agree with that. And just quickly, our situation was really, I would consider it a ramp up. We've had yearly corporate investments that I would call conservative, and we've kept our additional personnel and programming costs very respectable and leveraging as much as we can from what we currently have. So it was not a big launch. I would say that the cost of entry, relatively speaking, is lower than some other situations you could be entering. So that has helped us, although, again, the complexity, everything that you do is complex. So to that extent, there are some costs involved with that.
I have to make a shout out to Zype, because I walked in their offices 3 years ago, and it was my dream for 30 years to have my own network. And without a Zype, it was impossible. I would have had to spend $2 million. And they actually made my life come to fruition. And the Zypes of the world are what allow the small niche programs that, if you don't have $5 or $10 million to launch a network, you have to be creative. You have to be in for the long haul. But thank you, Zype. You made it happen.
Wow, and that's the power of OTT, and also validates our choice for Company of the Year. So I don't think anybody was paid there. So,
well, I'll hand it back over to Brian. Thank you, panelists. I think this was a great discussion, and thank you to the trenders.
Awesome job.